Um, well, I was aware of the project before I got the invitation because I used to work for Toshiko Mori, and I knew that she alerted me to it. Of course, when she said it, I really wasn't sure what to think. So then I got the email, so that confirmed what she had said to me, but I still, pretty much in shock that it was actually going to be a real project. And I just considered it the opportunity of a lifetime, so I never really considered not doing it. Um, I was aware of his work through, again, when I was working at Toshiko's office, she was working on her newsstand for the Jinhua Architecture Park. And I wasn't working on that project, but I heard about Ai Weiwei and fake design. And I think that this this project, in the way that he's curating this project and that last project, seems to be in keeping with his work as an artist, where he's really interested in the spectacle of human behavior, particularly as it confronts strange situations. That was something that we were definitely aware throughout the process of how our behavior was as much part of the the project as the buildings. So um, for me, because the client was so abstract, I began with thinking about the experiential qualities of the project, thinking about how light would enter the project and how you would move through the spaces. And to that end, I began with thinking about the site constraints, because those were a lot more concrete in the information we were given from the client. And those, we were given different plots, and mine was at a corner, and we were given footprints, building footprints as constraints. The other thing that we were told was that different exposures were more desirable, the south being the most desirable. And my footprint happened to be oriented at 45 degrees to south. So my project really evolved around reorienting the building and the spaces toward the south. And so I literally took the footprint and I rotated it up towards south as you kind of move from floor to floor. I had a 3-story site constraint, so I was able to kind of get a little bit more height, and that was a nice way to kind of be able to develop the facade. And so I looked at I thought it was a nice connection to the vernacular of Chinese architecture to kind of focus on the wall, since that's such a big part of Chinese building practice, and how the encloses encloses and defines spaces. So the other aspect of responding to the site was the climate, and I saw the wall as a kind of protective surface, and so the penetrations of the wall were few and were sort of very carefully considered. And then the building got more open internally, where I put a glass core through the center to create a courtyard space. And again, the courtyard is also, that just relates to kind of standard building typology. So for me, that was also an interesting thing to kind of relate the project to. The other thing it did was it created kind of interesting intra-relationships within the building, where you could have views through and across from inside to outside to inside. So then when I started thinking about a narrative for who these occupants might be, I imagined that this would be occupied by a family that would have a active social calendar. And so I imagined that the different floors of the space would kind of change in the spectrum from being open and interconnected to being more closed. And so the main floor, I wanted to collect all of the living spaces on the main floor and the lower floor, and that would spill out into the outdoor space. And then the top floor would be the master suite. And I thought of the master suite as a sort of almost like a residence within the residence. It had its own separate private stair. The main circulation through the house was around this glass core, so you kind of had this anticipation of where you were going as you went around. But this separate secondary stair was along the wall surface and kind of slid between interior spaces in the wall, with some views out, and so that the master of the house could kind of come and go in a sort of private, separate sequence. I guess when I first started with this design of this sort of rotated floor plate, I was worried about the complexity I was producing, and wondering how I was going to translate this into the methods that we saw in practice at the site, because they were pretty primitive. They don't have access to very sophisticated equipment. But what I realized was that I had generated a ruled surface, which can be described by just connecting straight lines from points at either edge of the surface. So that combined with a consultation I had with a structural engineer named Rich Garlock at Leslie Robertson, where we determined that we could build the floor plates first and then the envelope second, kind of led to a sequence that I thought would be executable in that environment. So basically, the structural approach is kind of stacked tables. Internal walls support the floors sequentially, and then segments from one floor plate to the next can be subdivided into equal parts, and then those points can be connected, and then you have straight lines that then describe a surface that's curvilinear and pretty complex. So I thought that was going to be an interesting challenge, like a way of pushing the boundaries of building while making the methodology relatively straightforward. First and foremost, I wanted to design a project that had a rich spatial complexity for the future occupants, but at the same time something that pushed formal and spatial boundaries architecturally. And then while doing that, would be able to draw on standard materials and methods available at the site. Well, first of all, I really, really enjoyed the experience of traveling halfway around the world and engaging with this community of architects. It was amazing to meet people from all different parts of the world, as well as to reunite with people that I knew from my past. That being part of a development on such a grand scale was also something that was really interesting and got me interested in thinking about the issues sort of that are bigger than the project itself. It made me interested in being part of a future project where I could be involved in the way that a project like this was conceived, our project was only a small subset of the bigger Ordos project, and so thinking about how our piece kind of relates to these other pieces, I think would be, is an interesting kind of way to continue thinking about the project. I really found it fascinating, and I think that a lot of the participants there couldn't stop kind of staring at the model and just looking at the relationships that were there. It was really interesting. I mean, I can't think of any example of 100 different designs all together in that proximity, where patterns start to emerge. It was really interesting to see that as much as there was variety, there was commonality, and I kept thinking about like Robert Venturi's categories, which was the duck, which was the decorated shed, and then I would add the third category, which is the field. And then the way that some of the projects, not intentionally, I don't think, ended up having relationships with each other, and that was really amazing to kind of have that sort of other layer emerge. I think it would be hard to imagine a developer in the U.S. taking on that level of risk, particularly thinking about the fact that the house project is only a subset of the bigger project. Thinking about this entire project, it's almost unimaginable, because you need, the amount of resources you need, the sheer amount of space you need, developing an entire city from scratch. I mean, that all of that is so, it's just hard to imagine in this day and age. Now, centuries ago, that's a different story. But I mean, the fact that the other thing that I think is really important about it is how design enters into it, and allowing the architects the freedom to design, and allowing design to kind of really play a foregrounded role in shaping the spatial experience of it is also something that to me is unprecedented, and is something that would be hard to imagine, because again, because of the risk involved. Well, I think that the freedom that an architect has, or that the architects had in this case, really allowed us to kind of imagine architecture having much more of an agency than it really does in most day-to-day projects. At the same time, because we were sort of relegated to somewhat passive participants, like we were given these constraints, that there was a limit as to how much that could be enacted, but it was something that you could kind of imagine growing out of your project. Like, how does your project start to play into the ideas about the community? The thing about it also, I think, is that the scale of the undertaking and the variety of architecture that enters in really is something that that allows architecture to kind of come to the forefront in a way that really brings power to the architect, but also responsibility. I really, thinking about this developer project really makes me interested in speculative work like this, and it would be great to be involved in another project like this. But as I was saying, that to be involved at a position of kind of being able to be part of the planning part of it, I think would be really amazing. So not just to kind of replicate the experience on, with a bigger scale project, but to kind of be able to be part of the process where you think about how all of the pieces go together.